the attack on our rights is shocking, and it's the social consequences of this are unspeakable, really. I mean, people are not going to comply. They're not complying now. I'm sure you know this. In fact, you've probably attended them, but there are speakeasies and all over New York City popping up where you can go to dinner and gather on more than 5, more than 10, even 30 people, and they're drinking, they're having dinner together. They're in defiance of the law. Friends of mine in Manhattan sit in their penthouses, and every night at after nightfall, people rush out into the streets with noisemakers, just to illustrate that they believe in freedom. It's very interesting to me that you use this word right. You've been using this repeatedly. Our right to assemble, our right to associate, our right to speak. A right is not something that's contingent. It's something that you actually possess. It's not granted to you by the government. It's something you own by virtue of your humanity. It's hard to talk about rights in these times, and we don't apparently have the right to our own property because the government can shut down our business on grounds that it's unessential, right? We apparently don't have the right even to leave our homes. So once you take that away, I mean, Dave, I don't want to be alarmist about this or anything, but look, from a philosophical or intellectual point of view, we are living the practical reality of what comes very close to being a totalitarian state right now. Now, fortunately, thank you, political leaders, you're letting the grocery stores work. Fortunately, they're private. Thank you for letting us have pharmacies. They're private entities too. So we're grateful for the little bit of private markets that are left. But the attack on everybody else and the attack on our rights is shocking, and it's the social consequences of this are unspeakable, really. I mean, people are not going to comply. They're not complying now. I'm sure you know this. In fact, you've probably attended them, but there are speakeasies and all over New York City popping up where you can go to dinner and gather on more than 5, more than 10, even 30 people, and they're drinking, they're having dinner together. They're in defiance of the law. Friends of mine in Manhattan sit in their penthouses, and every night at after nightfall, people rush out into the streets with noisemakers, just to illustrate that they believe in freedom, And for God's sake, do we not believe in freedom anymore? The politicians presume that we're like pieces on a chessboard that can just move around. But you know what? It's not true. That is not the human mind. We are not inanimate objects. We are not birds in cages. We will live free, one way or the other.
So what would you say? So of course I'm with you, but what would you say to the people that would say, but all of those people, your friends that are going out onto the streets at night, and the people that are getting together at speakeasies and going out more than they have to go out and the rest of it, and exercising their rights and freedom, that those are the people who are going to keep this thing spreading, because people don't know when to rein in their own personal responsibility and do something so that society doesn't crumble, something like that.
Well, I'd say that at the height of the enlightenment, where we discovered this idea of human freedom, there was also disease. We didn't have very clean water. There were annual viruses that came along and killed people, and there were pandemics and so on, but they still somehow came to believe that human beings have the right to speak and associate and trade, and we work around it. And part of the belief in freedom is the confidence that society has the intelligence to deal with things like viruses that come along, and the existence of disease does not disable the whole of modernity. It just doesn't. We can't think this way. Modernity was forced at a time when there were diseases, and even back to the Black Death in Venice and in the 13th century, when there was still dangerous, they still kept trade going. There was some towns would come up with the restrictions and that sort of thing, but but the idea of violating people's rights, fundamental rights to live and choose and speak and everything, was even unthinkable 500 years ago. I mean, our response we've done here is pre-modern. It's medieval. It's 11th and 12th century style stuff, except with 21st century technology. And we're not responding to this thing scientifically, even the slightest bit. The response by the political class, and I mean from about March 15th onward, was nothing short of mystical, superstitious. It was a panicked response. Let's just throw everybody in a cage of their own creation and punish anybody for coming out of it. And I totally forgive people who are going to these speakeasies. You could say that's prudent, they shouldn't be doing that, but for God's sake, people exercising their fundamental rights, I'd say we need more of that, not less of that right now.
Do you think that's partly just human nature, that so many people just operate purely in fear? So, like a month ago when we had that 2-day window where suddenly everything shut down out of nowhere, they announced the entire NBA season was canceled, and then they canceled all these public events, and everything sort of happened within a 2-day thing, that there becomes this odd rush to cancel because you don't want to be the one guy who's going against the crowd, right? You don't want to be the one guy who says, no, we're not going to cancel our season. We're not going to cancel all of our things. We're going to wait it out a little bit, knowing that the risk that you take of being just destroyed by the media and everything else on the other side is probably worse than just going along with the crowd, with the wave.
Yeah, I understand your point. I have my doubts that there was any public support for this actually at all. Now, it's entirely up to private venues whether or not they want to have these gatherings or accept the liability associated with NBA games or South by Southwest, and that sort of thing. South by Southwest didn't choose to cancel that conference. That was a governmental decision. So I'm looking at this, and I'm not saying whether that was maybe South by Southwest should have canceled. I don't know. I think about this a lot. I'm not actually sure about that because that's mostly all young people there who are actually not in any great danger from COVID. So I'm not sure about that, and it's hard to do counterfactuals here. But with this much, Dave, I know, and I think you know too. Politicians, by which I mean governors, mayors, senators and congressmen and so on, are not owners of anything. Their main job is to get elected again. That's it. So they don't really have a financial or economic stake. They don't have skin in the game apart from the desire to get voters to vote for them again. And there was a sudden panic on the part of political leaders at all levels, really, that if anybody died while they were in office, that they would somehow be blamed for this, unless they just bludgeoned people, and ruined people's lives. So they somehow believed there was less risk to steal people's property and arrest people in their homes than it was to be blamed for public death, and that gets us back to a problem that began this discussion: the role of the media here. Because what they're really fearing ultimately is this cancel culture, the Twitter mobs and the New York Times editorial page and the media culture that's lost all rationality and clarity. They're afraid of being denounced and dragged through the mud and drawn and quartered and so on by the press. So I ultimately
doesn't that feel like
really
a perfect storm to you? Doesn't that feel like a perfect storm of the end of the media that we've all been seeing? And as you said before, you didn't even want to see it, but that so many of us have seen the end of mainstream media. We've watched our academic and political institutions crumble. And then something like this comes in and just takes the last remaining foundation of it and then adds fear to it. And you take just fearful people who don't even understand what their rights are, as you alluded to earlier. Right. And then you really have the perfect storm to control everybody.
I like this phrase, the perfect storm, and I think it's the best description to explain what's happened to us, really. It wasn't really a conspiracy. And from the top, but of course, there's conspiracy theories, and we'll never stop them. They've been generated by the day. And in fact, I totally forgive that. People want to understand what has happened to their freedoms, what's happened to their rights, why did the world go dark suddenly? And people assume there's some central plan. But I don't believe that, actually. I think it's just this combination of factors. And I've been wanting to kind of write about this for a while, but yeah, it is a perfect storm. It was a howling media, panicked politicians, and just this onslaught, combined with a lack of information, what I've described as an epidemic crisis that led to a complete panic. But we're going to be spending the next 10 years trying to figure this out.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of nonstop yelling, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.